Hi there, this is S.J. Thomason. I watched a debate recently between Glen Scrivener and Matt Dillahunty called Morality, Can Atheism Deliver a Better World? This was on the Unbelievable radio channel with Justin Brierley. In the debate, Glen Scrivener presented a compelling case for objective moral values and duties based on our foundational Christian beliefs that all lives matter and should be valued regardless of religion, race, age, disabilities, wealth, or other distinction. He presented examples of events that were objectively morally wrong, such as the murder by the Nazis of the Jews during World War II and the decrease in Down syndrome in the UK following fetal tests and abortions. In both of these examples, a portion of the population has or had been distinguished by ethnicity or age, and their lives have been terminated due to those distinctions. In a morally relativistic system, one cannot necessarily judge the actions or murders in other countries, so long as the people in those cultures believe what they are doing is right. In contrast, objective morality refers to the objective moral values and duties that exist regardless of our opinions about them. In this particular debate, I noticed 4 reasoning errors that atheists commonly make. So we're going to listen to a couple of snippets of the debates, and then I'm going to come back and explain why many of the statements by Mr. Dillahunty were fallacious.
I'm not saying that secular humanism guarantees a better world. But even if we take what Glen's saying, even if you were to look at this as Christianity light without the God thing, I would already view that as better because A, we guarantee that we have humans' best interests at heart. That's humanism. It's the foundation of it. You can say, and you would be correct, that it's just a bold, bald assertion that we should care about humans. Okay? I have no response to that. I don't even know why anybody would want to come up with a response. There's nothing that says the world will be better this way, except for this. I did a debate in a Church of Christ where I told them I could write a better book than the Bible and I could prove it to them. Because I could rewrite it word for word, reverse its position on slavery, and it would be a better book. Because for the people who are looking at this, not so much as metaphorical lessons or like that, if they're looking at this as an instruction book for life, that book advocates slavery. That's not even a question. If you were to say, thou shalt not own a human being as property, that would be better than saying you can and that you can pass them on. And so this was the example I used for the people who are kind of like Bible worshipers, not the people who go in looking for, hey, there's an interesting message here, or they're going to tell me something about my life, but no, this is literally word for word, blah, you know. That type of mindset is probably more responsible for the harm and damage that a lot of us would lay at the foot of Christianity than Glen's version, for sure. I mean, I don't think Glen's pro-slavery at all. And when you start looking at things where you are finding a way to take a message that could easily be viewed as this is a blood magic sacrifice and say, well, life has to consume life to exist, and you want to kind of maybe blow off why God would have made it that way or why it had to be made that way, which is a weird and interesting theological discussion. Getting rid of those things and keeping the good parts is all I've advocated for ever. And secular humanism, to me, is taking the good parts, whether they're found in Christianity, Judaism, Scientology.
And who's deciding on, in a sense, and the good is simply defined by what you regard as the measure of human well-being, and anything that basically points us in that direction.
And it's not
as the moral,
and it's not fully defined or anything else. But to pretend that we don't have some beginning understanding of it, I think is a bit ridiculous.
Okay.
So let's just note what he said right there. One of the things that a lot of atheists do is they use consequentialism to explain our objective morality. So what they say is if we have these shared values of well-being and valuing care over harm, then it's a human issue. And because we have this particular shared consequence, that the source of the consequence must also be the consequence that we appreciate. You can see what's going on here. It's circular reasoning. It's flawed.
So what? I mean, so I think very briefly, in a sense, that Matt is sketching out this idea that there is a secular morality.
Well, there's an example that came along with this that Glen produced when he was listing off societal health versus religiosity and teeing me up for the Gregory S. Paul thing. He mentioned divorce rates. But that comes with the presumption that divorce is a bad thing.
Sure.
And I don't believe that. I'm recently divorced. Me and my ex-wife are as good friends now as we ever were, and better. And we're both in agreement that it was absolutely the right thing for us to do. And so what's happened here is, from my perspective, and obviously people can disagree, religious thinking, religious teaching, religious dogma has done a number of great disservices to human beings by setting up a notion of a soulmate, by setting up the notion that marriage needs to be one man, one woman forever. That's caused countless problems. By setting up a view of death that does not allow people to deal with that. If we started with the notion that death is the eventual consequence of life, it would fundamentally change, and that was the end as far as we knew, and anything else would be a bonus. It would fundamentally change, I think, how we treated people while they were still alive. And so there's a number of problems here that are rooted in the theology, rooted in the notion that there's a God, which I think if you set those aside and just focus on the things that actually directly try to benefit human beings, it has to be better.
So it's all the benefits of Christianity plus a few more, because you haven't got some of the baggage, essentially.
Well, Matt said that he could write a Bible that's superior to the Bible by reversing its position on slavery. I think if you started from scratch without the Bible, though, I don't think you, and I don't think anyone has written a book or a series of books or a collection of books, a library of books, that has done what the Bible has done for slavery in the world. Because slavery is a human universal, and it has not been overturned by anyone other than those who took the Bible seriously back in the 18th century. They were evangelical Christians, they were Quakers, they were people who took the Bible seriously. So
parts of it seriously.
It's a longer discussion about how you take the Old Testament, but that's got to be interesting, at least, because we can't do a compare and contrast. There's no A/B testing about this. Okay, there's only
which I think kind of undermines what you were just saying.
So let's point out something from this conversation. Our conscience tells us that all humans have an intrinsic value. This is why the Nazis used propaganda to portray the Jewish people as rats and less than human. This is also why nurses tell expectant mothers that they can terminate the pregnancy if the test for Down syndrome come back positive. Terminating the pregnancy is much more tolerable of a term, as it dehumanizes the fetus. This term helps the woman justify the murder of her unborn child because the child is just flesh, or a clump of cells. Since we have objective moral values that value all life, liberty, love, truth, justice, mercy, benevolence, and universalism that transcends generations, a source of these values must transcend generations. Since we also have objective moral duties to do what's right with respect to these values and to follow the golden rule, that also transcends generations. So a moral lawgiver that transcends generations must exist. The existence of objective morality is a question of moral ontology, how people come to believe we have objective moral values and duties, or whether they follow or appreciate these objective values and duties is a question of moral epistemology. Matt Dillahunty and other atheists often use epistemology to try to refute the existence of objective morality. This is a category error. Just because Jill doesn't follow the golden rule doesn't mean the golden rule does not exist. To put this another way, just because Ted does not understand math does not mean math does not exist. The second reasoning error I identified for Matt Dillahunty in this particular debate was related to his appeal to slavery in the Old Testament. He stated that slavery was wrong and that he could have written a better Bible, which would have omitted slavery. Yet by what objective standard is Matt using to make this moral claim about ancient culture? He can't have his cake and eat it too. Either we have objective morality by which we can judge practices in all cultures, or we do not, and therefore are not in a position to judge them. Matt Dillahunty said he would sit down with Hitler in one part of this interview to try to come to a shared foundation. Again, he appealed to our objective moral standard. He just doesn't want to say the word objective because he knows what the theological implications would be. And of course, he's concurrently saying, while he's seeking the shared foundation, that we live in a morally relativistic culture. The third reasoning error I identified from Matt Dillahunty was his flawed approach to the research about the health benefits of intrinsic religiosity. He often focuses on findings from a single study by Gregory S. Paul that is based on a univariate analysis, as pointed out to by Glen Scrivener, and thus excludes necessary control variables, rendering a significant potential for spurious results. In other words, if you're not including things such as income and health and other factors that strongly play into some of the outcome variables in studies, then you have to realize that your results might be spurious. They might be meaningless because you did include these very important variables. That is the flaw in the Gregory S. Paul study. Matt has used this same study, strangely enough, in other debates, such as one with Michael Jones of Inspiring Philosophy. Yet, though his opponents have pointed to the study's inherent flaws, Dillahunty keeps trotting it out to try to discount the findings in mountains of meta-analytic studies that have pointed to the health benefits of extrinsic and intrinsic religiosity, but particularly to intrinsic religiosity. Extrinsic can actually have some bad outcomes. To cast doubt on the findings of the meta-analytic studies, Dillahunty pointed to one method, and I'm going to get to that in just a moment.
I mean, to the point of why should churches have tax-exempt status? I mean, there's a big debate going on in Australia, where I'm from right now, about that very question. I mean, one of the issues to throw into the mix is that there is a tremendous amount of public benefit for religions to flourish in societies. So when you look at the studies, you see that those who have an intrinsic religiosity, that is, those who identify as religion's the most important thing to me, it helps me to frame the rest of my life. If you ask those people on any kinds of measures of reproduction, how many babies do you have? Longer life? Are you happier? Will you have more of a resistance to depression, to recovery from illness, recovery from surgery? Do you have a resistance to divorce, to suicide? There are any number of factors where an intrinsic religiosity, that is, a body of people who are saying that their religion means the world to them, those people thrive in a world where, if the government was able to put that into the water, if they were able to put a magic elixir into the water that could deliver those benefits, longer life, for goodness sakes, happier, healthier, they give more money to charity. They give more money to secular charities than secular people do. They give more time to secular charities than secular people do. They give more blood than secular people give. All these things have been demonstrated in thousands of studies. So, throw that into the mix as a
One thing to note there was he named a number of very objective outcomes. These are not subjective opinions, they're objective outcomes that he cited. So I'm going to get to that in just a moment.
Government is looking at what will lead to the flourishing of society, what could make society better. Actually, intrinsic religiosity is something that could definitely do that. So,
and see, here's where we get to disagreement, but it's going to be difficult, because I don't have access to go look at studies and everything else. But if you do a Google search for religiosity versus societal health, there's a study that was done years ago that was in the Journal of Religious Education. So I'm going to get
2005. Is it Gregory S. Paul?
Yes, Gregory S. Paul.
Yeah, paleontologist.
Which shows something different. But in any
he's
case,
a paleontologist who was actually hacked off with creationists. You go to Wikipedia and you find Gregory S. Paul.
But that's all about Gregory S. Paul. I'm talking about his data.
You've been quoting him for 15 years, though.
I know, but I'm quoting his data, not him.
Yeah, but he's one study against thousands of others, and he swims against a tide of literally 89% of the studies show that everything goes in the other direction. He did a univariate analysis about secularity and how it relates to public benefits.
Sure, and I'm not saying that
he cherry-picked his results.
Oh, all right. Well, see, now we're in a different thing, because if we're going to start making accusations that his study's not wrong, or is not good because he cherry-picked it, I have problems with the other studies.
I'm not aware of the study, so could you just explain what's in the study, just so that
well, that's the thing. Without saying this isn't what I came in prepared to discuss, so I don't want to get the study wrong. The point I'm making is that
you've been getting it wrong for 15 years.
I've been getting what wrong for 15 years? What his study says?
His study is a univariate analysis of how secularity within European countries is indexed to a whole different number of things, like murder rates and that kind of thing. He didn't look at other things like crime rates and that sort of thing, because it didn't help his analysis.
Sure, so you are pointing to problems that you have with his methodology, but that's not me getting wrong what his report says.
Why are you camping out on his study? when literally there are thousands of studies that show the benefits of religion.
Well, I was getting to that a minute ago.
Okay.
Because a number of the things that in the studies that you would cite, I would also have a problem with their methodology. Because when you talk about, first of all, you've got the issue of self-reporting. How happy are you? And we know, for example, especially from ex-Mormons, that groups like Mormon culture encourage people to, because they are representatives of the church, to present themselves as happier when less problematic. Now, who knows what the actual truth is there? And I'm not saying what the truth is. What I'm saying is there's an issue with self-reporting. There's also an issue with what is the real foundation here? Is it that they are religious, which, by the way, is independent from the truth of the religious proposition? That's why the challenge that I had for years was show me a real, true benefit of religion that is necessarily only produced by the truth of that religion. Because you can produce those same things with a compelling lie. If you've got five religions and only one of them is true, but all five of those people, religious individuals or people who are adherents to those are reporting that they're better and happier and these other things, then it has nothing to do with the truth of the religion. It has to do with who we are. And it may be the case that what people need is the community, which religions have done a really good job of building those communities. And it's one of the things that secular organizations are working towards doing now, building strong.
So the idea of community speaks to extrinsic religiosity, which is the idea that you're using the church for benefits, such as developing relationships with a community. Intrinsic religiosity, again, is the belief in God, and it speaks to your value of your relationship with God. So what you saw here was that Matt decided to cast doubt on the findings of the meta-analytic studies by pointing to self-reports of happiness in some of the studies, claiming that religious people may report they're happy to toe the party line. He is correct to note that some studies use self-reports, which could bias the outcome or input variables. But the studies identified by Glen Scrivener included objective variables such as divorce rates, suicides, crime, and educational attainment. These are not something based on one's opinions. Numerous meta-analytic studies have found that intrinsic religiosity, as an end, not a means, has positive effects on health, happiness, and many other outcomes. Religion is a net gain to society. Another point that Matt Dillahunty seems to make that's a flaw is he uses, again, an ontological, epistemological error. What he's doing is he's talking about whether one's epistemology on how they come to a belief or how they receive health benefits or something like that, whether that happens is a question of the truth of the religion. That's speaking to an ontological question, whether or not something exists. So the next reasoning error I identified was Matt Dillahunty's misconceptions about Jesus. In one part of this video and in numerous other videos, I've heard him say, why does God sacrifice God? Couldn't he pay for our sins in other ways? Yes, God could have devised other ways, but the fact that Jesus' sacrifice was his chosen means does not discount his basic message of love, salvation, and the sacrifice of the strong for the benefit of the weak, rather than the other way around. All throughout the Old Testament, we learn that blood symbolizes life, and people sacrificed animals as offerings to God prior to eating them. Lower, weaker life forms are sacrificed for the sustenance of a higher, stronger life form, classic Darwinism. The Passover lamb was specified sacrifice for dinner at the Passover hundreds of years before the Word became flesh. The Passover lamb had to be blemish-free. Jesus, as the Passover lamb, was sacrificed for our sins and for our salvation. Only one without sins could pay the price for our sins to reconcile God's perfect mercy with his perfect justice. This is the basic message of Christianity. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that you came by. Please like, subscribe, and do come again. Bye-bye.